Most people think the enemy is failure. They're wrong. The real enemy is doing just enough, showing up, putting in average effort, living a life that looks responsible from the outside, but quietly, slowly, going nowhere. Because here's what nobody tells you. Average doesn't feel like failure. It feels fine. It feels comfortable. And that comfort is the thing that will cost you everything. This is the 10x rule by Grant Cardone. And it starts with one uncomfortable truth. Whatever you think your goals should be, multiply them by 10. And whatever you think it will take to get there, multiply that by 10 too. Introduction. Let me ask you something. Have you ever set a goal, a real one, the kind you actually wanted, and then watched it slip away? Not because you were lazy, not because you didn't care, but because somewhere along the way, it got harder than you expected, and you slowly, quietly let it go? If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. In fact, you're in the majority. And the man who wrote this book would tell you that the reason it happened has almost nothing to do with what you think it does. Grant Cardone built multiple companies from scratch. No family money, no connections to the right people, no fancy degree from a blue blood school. He'll be the first to tell you he wasn't especially gifted, and he definitely wasn't lucky. So what made the difference? One thing. For every sales call other people made, he made 10. For every property others looked at, he looked at 10. He approached every single venture in his life with a level of action that other people genuinely thought was insane. And that, he says, was the single biggest factor in everything he ever achieved. But here's the part that haunts him. He got the action part right for 30 years, and he still believes he fell short of his real potential. Why? Because he broke the second half of the rule. He never let himself dream at a big enough scale. So over the next 50 minutes, I'm going to walk you through every key idea in this book, what the 10x rule actually is, why average is more dangerous than failure, the 4 levels of action that determine almost everything about your life, and the mindset that separates the people who get what they want from the people who spend their lives explaining why they didn't. Let's get into it. Section 1. What the 10x rule actually is. Picture a young man, 29 years old, sitting alone in a hotel room in El Paso, Texas. He's just started his own business. He has no money except what he can generate from new sales. He has no business plan. He has no reputation. Nobody in the city has ever heard of him. And right now, he is seriously thinking about quitting. He'd assumed it would take him about 3 months to replace the income from his old job. Instead, it took almost 3 years. That's 12 times longer than he planned. And after just a few months, he went to a friend and said the words so many people say right before they give up. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. So what changed? What turned that defeated young man into someone who would go on to build multiple companies? He stopped making excuses about why it wasn't working, and he made one decision. He decided to increase his effort by 10 times. Instead of 2 or 3 sales calls a day, he started making 20 to 30, and almost immediately, everything began to shift. Now here's what's fascinating about what he discovered. He didn't get 10 times the results. He got about 4 times the results, from 10 times the effort. And to most people, that sounds like a terrible deal. 10 times the work for 4 times the return. Why would anyone do that? Because 4 times the results was the difference between a thriving business and a dead one. The extra effort wasn't waste. It was the price of admission. So let's define this thing clearly. The 10x rule has 2 parts, and most people only ever think about one of them. Part 1. You must take 10 times more action than you think is necessary. Part 2. You must set goals that are 10 times bigger than what you think you want. And it's that second part that trips almost everyone up, because we've all been trained our entire lives to be realistic, to set attainable goals, to not get our hopes up. Think about it. Who actually gets excited about a realistic goal? Who lies awake at night, fired up about something average? Cardone argues this is exactly backwards. The reason people abandon their goals the moment things get hard isn't that the goals were too big, it's that they were too small. A small goal doesn't generate enough fuel to push you through resistance. When the obstacles come, and they always come, a tiny realistic goal just isn't worth fighting for. But a huge, almost unreasonable goal, that's an engine. Here's a question he poses that reframes the whole thing. Let's say your original goal was to make $100,000, and let's say you change it to $1 million. Now imagine you fall short on both. Which one would you rather come up short on? Read that again. Coming up short on a 10 times bigger target still lands you somewhere extraordinary. Coming up short on a small, realistic target lands you nowhere worth being. And Cardone points to something most of us never stop to consider. The biggest disappointments in life don't usually come from aiming too high and missing. They come from aiming too low and hitting the target exactly. You set a modest goal, you achieve it, and then you're shocked to discover that you still don't have the life you actually wanted. So why do we do this? Why do we aim so low? Because most of our goals were never even ours to begin with. We've been told what counts as a lot of money. We've been told what's rich, what's poor, what's reasonable, what's possible. From the time we were children, we absorbed 1,000 quiet limits, and then we mistook those limits for our own ideas. The 10x rule is, at its core, a demand that you throw those inherited limits out. It says the target is never the problem. Any goal, attacked with the right actions in the right amounts, with enough persistence, is achievable. The problem is almost never the size of the dream. It's the size of the action behind it. And that single shift from "is this goal realistic" to "how much action will this actually require" is the foundation everything else in this book is built on. Because once you accept that your effort has been the missing variable all along, you start to look at every area of your life differently, including the one most people never think to question, whether you even have the right to want success in the first place. Section 2. Success is your duty. Let me take you back further in Cardone's life, to a much darker place. He's 25 years old. He has no money, no direction, too much free time, and nothing worth doing with it. He's surrounded himself with people going nowhere, and he's using drugs and alcohol every single day. In his own words, he was dying at 25, not from old age, from the absence of any purpose at all. He says it plainly. If he hadn't had a serious wake-up call right around then, he doesn't think he'd be alive today. That's how far gone he was. A young man drifting, treating his own life like it didn't much matter. And then something shifted. He stopped treating success as something that might happen to him and started treating it as an obligation, a duty, something he owed. Now, I want you to sit with that word for a second. Duty. Because this is one of the most important reframes in the entire book, and it's easy to skip past. Most people treat success as optional, as something nice to have, as something that happens to other people, the lucky ones, the connected ones, the gifted ones. And when you treat success as optional, here's what happens. You don't do what it takes to create it, and then you spend the rest of your life making excuses for why you didn't. But what happens when you flip it? When success stops being a preference and becomes a responsibility, the same way feeding your children is a responsibility. Think about how a good parent operates. They get up in the middle of the night. They work as hard as they have to in order to clothe and feed their kids. They put their own life on the line without a second thought. There's no "I'll get to it when I feel like it." It's not negotiable. Cardone says you must approach your own success with exactly that level of obligation. And then comes the second wake-up call, 25 years later. He's 50 years old. The economy is going through its biggest collapse since the Great Depression. He turns on the television one morning and sees it all unraveling. Unemployment climbing, homes being foreclosed on, banks shutting their doors, companies being bailed out, and he realizes something terrifying. His own company isn't strong enough. His own financial security, the wealth he thought was rock solid, is suddenly at risk. Why? Because he'd started to coast. He'd begun resting on what he'd already built. He had quietly stopped treating success as his duty, and the moment he did, everything he'd created became vulnerable. This is where Cardone makes a claim that genuinely makes some people uncomfortable. He says that failing to pursue success isn't just unfortunate, it's almost unethical. Now hold on, what does he mean by that? He's not talking about lying or stealing. He's expanding the whole idea of ethics. He's saying that you've been given a certain potential, talents, energy, a mind, a finite amount of time on this planet, and to deliberately operate far below that potential, to know what you're capable of, and then choose to do a fraction of it. He considers that a kind of betrayal of your family, of the people who depend on you, of the gift of your own capability. And before you push back on that, and plenty of people do, notice what usually comes next when someone hears this idea. They say something like, well, success isn't everything, or I don't need to be rich, I just want to be comfortable, I just want to be happy. Cardone has heard this in his seminars hundreds of times, and he has a pointed question for the person who says it. Are you actually at peace with that? Or are you quietly lowering the importance of something you haven't been able to achieve yet? Because here's the trap. The moment you start limiting how much success you want, you automatically limit what you'll be willing to do to get it. I just want enough sounds humble. It sounds wise even, but it quietly caps your effort. And then when the unexpected hits, when life throws gravity and resistance and bad luck at you, just enough turns out to be nowhere near enough. And this connects to something he insists on throughout the book. There is no shortage of success. It's not a pie with a fixed number of slices. It's not a lottery with one winner. Your neighbor getting rich doesn't make you poorer. The founders of one company succeeding didn't stop the next company from being built. Success isn't a resource you have to find, like gold buried in the ground. It's something human beings create out of ideas, creativity, persistence, and work. And there is no limit to how much of it can exist. So when you tell yourself there isn't enough to go around, not enough opportunity, not enough money, not enough room at the top, you're not describing reality. You're describing a story you've been sold. And that story is keeping you small. Treat success as your duty. Refuse the myth of shortage. Cardone says the moment you and your family genuinely start to see success as an obligation rather than an option, everything else begins to shift. But knowing it's your duty is only the beginning. The real question, the one that determines almost everything, is what level of action you're actually willing to take. And it turns out there are only 4. Section 3. The 4 degrees of action. One of the most common questions Cardone gets is also one of the most reasonable. Exactly how much action does it take to create success? People want a number. They want the secret shortcut. And his answer is blunt. There is no shortcut. The more action you take, the better your odds of catching a break. Disciplined, consistent, persistent action matters more than your concept, your idea, your invention, or your business plan. Most people don't fail because their idea was bad. They fail because they were operating at the wrong level of action. And according to Cardone, there are only 4 levels, 4 degrees of action that every single person chooses from in every area of their life. Let me walk you through all 4. And as I do, I want you to honestly ask yourself which one you've been living in. The first degree, doing nothing. This is exactly what it sounds like. No longer taking any action to move forward. The person doing nothing has on some level given up. They're now willing to accept whatever comes their way. But here's the part that surprises people. Doing nothing is not effortless. It actually takes enormous energy. Think about it. It takes work to lose a job because you didn't produce. It takes effort to get passed over for a promotion, go home and explain that to your spouse. It takes real creativity to keep manufacturing excuses for why your life looks the way it does. The person doing nothing isn't relaxing. They're spending all their energy justifying their situation. And here's the strange thing Cardone points out. These same people will almost always find one area where they take massive action: video games, fantasy sports, some hobby they pour everything into. The energy exists, it's just pointed at the wrong target. The second degree, retreating. Retreaters take action, but in reverse. They actively pull back to avoid the negative experiences they're afraid of. This is the person who tried something, got a result they didn't like, and decided never to risk that feeling again. And listen to how it sounds, because you've heard these exact phrases. The stock market's rigged, I'm never investing again. Most marriages fail, so I'm staying single. The job market's terrible, why even try? Every one of those is a retreat. And notice, each one still requires an action. Even retreating is a decision, a choice that takes effort to defend. Cardone makes a poignant observation here. Watch any healthy child, and you'll see that retreat is not natural human behavior. Children advance, they reach, they grab, they explore. Retreating is something we learn from years of being told, be careful, don't touch that, get away from there. It's drilled into us, and for many people, it becomes the default response to anything unfamiliar. The third degree, normal action. Now this one is the most dangerous of all, and that surprises people because it sounds so harmless. Normal action is the level most of society operates at. It's the person who appears to be doing enough, who looks from the outside completely fine. They take just enough action to create an average life, an average career, an average marriage, average finances, and as long as conditions stay stable and predictable, they're okay. But here's the problem. Conditions never stay stable forever. Imagine someone who's coasted along at normal for 20 years. Their life works until it doesn't. A recession hits, an industry shifts, a health crisis arrives, and suddenly the person who was taking just enough action discovers they have no margin, no cushion, no extra capacity. Average worked right up until the moment the world changed, and then average left them completely exposed. Cardone calls this the most accepted, most authorized level of action there is. Society approves of it, which is exactly why it's a trap. Nobody criticizes you for being normal. Nobody warns you. You just blend in, until the day blending in is the thing that sinks you. And then there's the fourth degree, massive action. This is the level Cardone built his entire life around, and he argues it's not extreme at all. It's actually the most natural state there is. Look at children before the world talks them out of it. They're in constant motion, full out, all the time. Look beneath the surface of the ocean, inside an ant colony, beneath the crust of the planet. Everywhere in nature, you see relentless, massive activity. Nowhere do you see normal. Remember that young man in El Paso? This is what massive action looked like for him. He'd start at 7 in the morning and not return to his hotel until 9 at night, cold visiting as many as 40 businesses in a single day. A real estate agent once rode along with him for 3 days just to watch how he grew his business. After 3 days, the man admitted, "There's no way I can do this another day. I'm only riding with you, and I'm exhausted." And here's the signal Cardone wants you to recognize. Massive action creates new problems. It generates so much momentum, so much opportunity, that you suddenly have more to handle than you did before. Most people see new problems as a sign something's gone wrong. Cardone says it's the opposite. If you're not creating new problems, you're not taking enough action. And one more thing happens at this level. You start getting criticized. People operating at the other 3 degrees will feel threatened by your activity. They'll call you obsessive, a workaholic, manic. They'll tell you to slow down, but notice who's saying it. Cardone points out that in his entire life, the people calling his effort too much were always operating at a lower level than he was. No one more successful ever told him he was working too hard, because they knew exactly what it took. So those are the 4 degrees: doing nothing, retreating, normal action, and massive action. 3 of them lead to some version of failure or mediocrity. Only one creates an extraordinary life. And that brings us to the level that traps more people than any other. The one that feels safe, looks responsible, and quietly fails almost everyone who chooses it. Section 4. Average is a failing formula. Look around you. Chances are you're surrounded by average. It's the accepted level. It's the level the entire middle class is built on. And Cardone argues there's a growing pile of evidence that it simply doesn't work anymore. Consider a few numbers he points to. The average worker reads less than 1 book a year. The average worker puts in around 37.5 hours a week, and that's assuming they're actually working every one of those hours, which most aren't. Meanwhile, the top CEOs in the country, the ones people love to resent for how much they earn, claim to read more than 60 books a year. Now you can be angry about the gap, or you can notice what's actually behind it. One group is feeding their mind constantly. The other isn't. That's not luck. That's a choice repeated thousands of times. Let me give you a story that captures the alternative. The year is 2008. The economy has just cratered, and nearly every CEO in America is doing the same thing: cutting costs, closing locations, hunkering down. The founder of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, does some of that too. But then he does something almost no other CEO does. He gets in the field. He travels across the country, store to store, and long after the average employee has gone home for the night, this billionaire is standing in his own coffee shops at 9 p.m., talking to actual customers, asking them directly how Starbucks could serve them better. Think about that image. A man worth a fortune who could be anywhere, doing anything, out at 9 at night gathering feedback from people buying $4 coffee. That is greater than average thought, followed by greater than average action. It's so far beyond what anyone expects of a CEO that it stands out completely. And Starbucks didn't just survive that recession, it expanded, not necessarily with more stores, but through one man's refusal to operate at a normal level when everything around him was contracting. Now contrast that with how most new ventures actually begin. A couple of people get together. They've got a great idea. They write a business plan, and they make what they proudly call conservative projections. Let's say we show the product to 10 people, one of them says. We're bound to close at least 3. That's realistic. Then someone, trying to be extra safe, says, let's cut that in half just to be cautious. And they decide that even on the cautious plan, they'll be fine. But here's what they never accounted for. They calculated how many sales they'd close, without ever calculating how many calls it would take just to get those 10 meetings in the first place. Even the most amazing product on earth might require 100 calls just to land 10 meetings. They planned the destination. They never planned the brutal effort of the journey. So what happens? The optimistic projections fall apart. A key partner gets sick. The economy shifts. Some unexpected event swallows everyone's attention for 6 months. The money runs out faster than anyone imagined, with no income coming in. The enthusiasm curdles into bickering, and one of the founders starts quietly wondering whether he should bail. The whole thing collapses, not because the idea was bad, but because they planned for average difficulty in a world that delivers far more than average resistance. Cardone has a vivid way of describing what real effort actually feels like. He says, don't think average, think massive. Imagine you have to carry a 1,000-pound backpack every single day into a 40-mile-an-hour wind, up a 20-degree slope. That's not pessimism. That's just an honest picture of what it takes to push anything meaningful through the gravity and resistance of the real world. And this is the heart of why average is so dangerous. Average assumes everything goes smoothly. It assumes stable conditions, no emergencies, no bad luck. But life doesn't operate on those assumptions. So when the inevitable resistance arrives, competition, a downturn, a loss of interest, the person operating at average has no reserve to draw from. Their project tumbles. He pushes this even into the personal realm, and it stings a little. What if you live 20 years longer than your savings? What happens to entire groups of people who made average financial plans when a decade of difficult times arrives? Average isn't just a failing formula for business. It's a failing formula for a life. So Cardone's instruction is uncompromising. Rid yourself of every concept of average. Study what average people do, and then refuse to do it. Treat average like a terminal disease. Look up the word itself, he says. Typical, ordinary, common. Ask yourself honestly, is that really the word you want describing your marriage, your health, your work, your one life? Because nobody ever stood in line, or saved for years, or felt their heart race over something merely average. Section 5. 10x goals and the domination mindset. So if average goals are the trap, what does setting a real goal actually look like? Cardone believes the number one reason people abandon their goals is heartbreakingly simple. They never set them high enough to begin with. We've all been warned not to aim too high. Be realistic, they say. And Cardone has a near physical reaction to that word. He despises realistic because realistic is based entirely on what other people, usually people operating at the lowest levels of action, have decided is possible. Their realistic has nothing to do with your potential. Why would you let someone else's ceiling become your roof? He makes a subtle but powerful point about motivation here. If you start small, you'll almost certainly stay small. A modest, realistic goal can generate enough energy to carry you through hard times, because nobody lies awake at night fired up about an average payoff. The goal itself has to be big enough, juicy enough, to keep your attention when resistance hits. And here's a practical habit he swears by. Most people write their goals down maybe once a year, at New Year's, and then forget them. Cardone writes his down twice a day, every morning when he wakes up, and every night before he sleeps, and he words them as though he's already achieved them. Not I want to, but I am. His goals aren't quiet little wishes. They're enormous, specific, and reviewed constantly, so they're always there fueling the day's action. But a big goal needs more than just size. It needs purpose behind it. Handy gives the example of money. Say you want $100 million in the bank. Does anyone need that? No, it's a goal. But here's the key. If all you do is chase the money with no bigger reason, you'll often make it and then waste it. Look at how many people got rich and died broke. So he says, tie your big goal to something even bigger. Save the 100 million and aim it at funding something that matters, helping people, leaving a mark. When your goal is connected to a deeper purpose, it generates the horsepower to drive every action underneath it. And there's a quiet truth tucked in here about how much our goals were ever really ours. Cardone says it bluntly. Most people walk the path they're on simply because it's the path other average people walked. Most go to college because they were told to. Most never question the size of what they're reaching for. He even says this: if he could talk to your 5 closest friends about their goals, he could probably guess yours. You and your ambitions are shaped, quietly, constantly, by the people around you. So if you're going to model your goals on anyone, he says, at least pick the giants, the people who've already created massive success, because they'll be the first to tell you, don't aim at what I did, you can do even more. Now, once your goals are 10x sized, something else has to change too. The way you think about competition. And Cardone's view here is provocative. He titles this idea bluntly, competition is for sissies. His argument is that competing keeps you small, because you're constantly watching what someone else is doing. Your eyes are on them instead of on creating something new. He doesn't want to compete. He wants to dominate. He wants to so completely own his space that clients, the market, and even his competitors think of him first. He points to how this works in the real world. There was a time the word Xerox didn't mean a company. It meant making a copy. People didn't make copies, they Xeroxed. For a while, every personal computer got called an IBM. That's not competition. That's domination so total that your name becomes the entire category. So how do you dominate? Cardone's answer is almost stubbornly simple. You do what others refuse to do. You find the thing your competitors won't do. Maybe because of their size, maybe their caution, maybe their commitment to other things, and you exploit exactly that gap. He worked with a company in the dental implant space, where the market leader had cut all its travel and decided to handle every client by phone and over the internet. So what did Cardone's team do? They went the other way entirely. They dominated personal, in-person contact, precisely in the space the leader had abandoned. While the competitor retreated, they advanced into the opening. That's domination, not competition, and he has a name for the actions nobody else is willing to take. He calls them only practices, not best practices, only practices. One company he consulted realized the entire industry was terrible at following up with customers. Specifically, nobody ever called a client back the moment they walked out the door. So they started doing exactly that. Managers calling customers' cell phones as they pulled out of the parking lot. Please come back, I have something you have to see. The results were almost unbelievable. Nearly 50% of those clients turned around and came back, and of those, almost 80% bought right then. One simple action nobody else was willing to take, and it transformed the business. This is the domination mindset. Don't ask how to keep up with your competition. Ask what they will not do, and then go do that relentlessly until you're not even in the race anymore, until you're not a competitor. You're the space itself. But here's the thing, setting a 10x goal and deciding to dominate, that's the easy part. It happens in your head in a single inspired moment. The hard part is what it takes to sustain that level day after day when the world is telling you to ease off. And that requires a quality most people have been taught to fear. Section 6. Obsession, all in, and expansion. Here's a word that makes most people flinch. Obsession. We've been trained to treat it like a disease, something unhealthy, something to be medicated, managed, talked down from. But Cardone wants to completely rehabilitate that word, because he believes obsession isn't a defect. It's a requirement. The dictionary defines obsession as having your thoughts dominated by a persistent idea or desire. And Cardone says, yes, exactly. That is precisely how you must approach your goals. He challenges you to name one person who achieved true greatness without being obsessed on some level. You can't do it. Every artist, every inventor, every world changer was completely consumed by their vision. Their greatness was a direct result of their fixation. He uses a beautiful image for this. Obsession, he says, is like a fire. You want to build it so big that people feel compelled to gather around it just to feel the warmth. But a fire doesn't sustain itself. You have to keep feeding it, keep adding wood, or it burns down to ash. Your obsession works the same way. You have to keep stoking it every single day, or it dies. And he points to where this obsessive nature actually comes from. Children. Watch a small child lock onto something they want, a toy, a question, a person's attention, and they pursue it with total, undivided focus. Obsession is the natural human state. It only becomes a problem when a parent, a teacher, eventually society itself, starts suppressing it. We teach children that their intense focus is somehow wrong, and slowly they learn to dial it down to normal. So when Cardone tells you to become obsessed, he's not asking you to become something unnatural. He's asking you to reclaim something that was trained out of you. Now, obsession alone isn't enough. You have to pair it with a willingness to fully commit, to go, as he puts it, all in. Most of us know that phrase from poker. It's the moment a player pushes all their chips into the center and risks everything. But Cardone makes a crucial distinction. In poker, when you go all in and lose, you're out. Your chips are gone. But in life, your chips are your energy, your creativity, your persistence, your ideas, and those never run out. You can go all in, fail completely, and then reload and go all in again, as many times as you want. There is no limit on how many times you can get back up. So why do people hold back? Because society taught us to play it safe, to conserve, to protect ourselves from loss. And it's built on a myth. The myth that your energy and creativity are finite resources that might get used up. They aren't. The bank refills every single day. So Cardone's question is simple. If you can never actually run out of chips, why would you ever not go all in? He ran a revealing experiment on this. His company was hired to do a mystery shop campaign for an international company, sending secret shoppers into more than 500 locations to find where the sales process was breaking down. They expected to find subtle problems. What they found was staggering. 63% of the locations never even presented the customer with a proposal to buy, never asked for the order at all. The company was about to spend millions on product training, when the real problem was that 2 out of 3 salespeople weren't even playing a single hand. They were so afraid of rejection that they never went for it. And this is where Cardone flips another piece of conventional wisdom. You've heard the advice, under-promise and over-deliver. He thinks that's backwards and ridiculous. Imagine putting on a Broadway show and advertising it as having a mediocre cast with merely average singing. Who would show up? Of course not. You overcommit and over-deliver. You make the big, bold promise, and then the size of that promise forces you to rise to it. He finds that the bigger the commitment he makes to a client, the higher his delivery naturally becomes. The promise pulls the performance up to meet it. Now all of this, obsession, going all in, overcommitting, gets its hardest test in one specific situation. When the world around you is contracting, when the economy is shrinking, when everyone is told to save, reduce, be careful, pull back. Cardone's principle here is a single phrase: expand, never contract. Because contracting is just another form of retreating, and it violates everything the 10x rule stands for. When the whole world goes defensive, a small handful of people do the opposite, and they capture enormous ground precisely because everyone else stepped back. He lived this during the recession. While his competitors were cutting staff and slashing their promotional budgets, he did the reverse. He didn't lay people off. He didn't pull back on marketing. He increased both. He even cut his own salary and redirected that money straight into promoting the business. In those 18 months, he spent more on advertising and promotion than he had in the previous 18 years. He published 3 books. He launched 4 new sales programs. He did 600 radio interviews and wrote more than 150 articles. While the rest of the world withdrew, he expanded on every single front. And he says the reason most people can't do this is a strange quirk of the human mind. The moment people start saving money, they automatically start saving everything else: their energy, their creativity, their effort, as if the brain can't tell the difference between conserving dollars and conserving boldness. The whole world held back at once, and the tiny few who expanded came out owning the territory everyone else abandoned. His own words capture it perfectly. I would rather die in expansion than die in contraction. I would rather fail pushing forward than in retreat. So the instruction is clear. Get off the couch. Get into the market. When the world tells you to shrink, that is exactly the signal to grow. Section 7. Fear, time, and criticism. So you've committed. You're taking massive action, expanding when others contract. And the moment you do, something shows up. Fear. Cardone has a radically different relationship with fear than most people, and it might be one of the most useful reframes in the entire book. Most of us treat fear as a stop sign, a warning to retreat, Cardone treats it as a green light. He says fear is actually a sign that you're doing exactly what you need to do to move in the right direction. In fact, if you're never feeling any fear, that's the real problem. It means you're only doing what's comfortable, and comfort just gives you more of what you already have. He plays with that old acronym for fear, false events appearing real, and it lands, because think about it, most of what you're afraid of never actually happens. Fear is driven by emotion, not logic. It's the boogeyman under the bed, terrifying in the dark, and completely empty when you actually look. So Cardone's rule is almost mechanical. If you're afraid to call a client, that fear is the sign you should call that client. If you're afraid to walk into your boss's office, that's the indicator to go do it. Fear doesn't tell you to run, it tells you where to go. And here's the key to beating it. You have to remove time from the equation. Picture a guy named John needs to make a call to a client, and just the thought makes him anxious. So instead of picking up the phone right away, he gets a cup of coffee. He sits, he thinks about it, he tells himself he needs to prepare. And every minute he waits, the fear grows. He imagines all the ways it could go wrong. By the time an hour has passed, the call feels monstrous. Cardone says, fear feeds on time. Starve it. The longer you give a fear to breathe, the stronger it gets. So pick up the phone immediately. Take the action before the fear has time to grow. He admits something surprising here. His own wife tells him he seems fearless, and he says the truth is the opposite. He's scared most of the time. He just refuses to feed the fear with time. He acts fast, before it can take hold. Now this connects directly to how he thinks about time itself, because he calls time management a kind of myth. He's not against using time well, but he says the people most obsessed with time management and work-life balance are usually the ones operating from a mindset of shortage. They believe there's not enough time, the same way they believe there's not enough success. He offers a sobering bit of arithmetic. If you live to 75, you have roughly 39 million minutes. Take any single day of the week, you get about 3,900 Mondays or Tuesdays in a lifetime. And here's the part that stops you cold. If you're 37 years old, you have fewer than 2,000 Wednesdays left. He asks, if you had only $2,000 left to your name, would you watch it slip away? Or would you fight to make it grow? That's your time. So the goal isn't to balance it. The goal is to get more out of every hour you have. And rather than seeing his family as competing for his time, he reframes that too. When his daughter was born, people told him he'd finally understand work-life balance. Instead, he found a solution rooted in priorities. Getting up an hour earlier each day to spend dedicated time with her before the workday swallowed him. He says your family shouldn't be the excuse for why you don't succeed. They should be the reason you do. And then there's one more thing that arrives the moment you start winning: criticism. Cardone wants you to expect it, even welcome it, because he sees criticism not as a sign you've done something wrong, but as proof you're succeeding. When his book hit the New York Times bestseller list, the criticism rolled in immediately. One competitor called the title arrogant. Another sneered, "Who does Cardone think he is?" Someone even called to tell him to fire his editor over the grammar. Did he listen for even a second? Not a chance. He had a New York Times bestseller. His insight is sharp. Criticism almost always comes from people who aren't taking action, and your abundance is highlighting their deficiency. The lower performer can't lift himself up, so he tries to tear you down instead. And he says criticism reliably comes right before admiration. The very same people putting you down will, soon enough, be the ones singing your praises, as long as you keep your foot on the accelerator. So treat it as a milestone. When the critics show up, it means you're finally big enough to be noticed. And the best possible response to criticism is simply to keep succeeding. Fear becomes your compass. Time becomes precious enough to multiply. Criticism becomes a scoreboard. All three are signals that you're on the right path. But underneath all the tactics and mindsets, there's a deeper question. Who do you have to actually become to live this way? Because Cardone spent his life studying the people who pull it off, and he found they share a very specific set of traits. Section 8. The 10x person. Who they are and how they think. Cardone spent most of his life studying successful people, and what he found is genuinely surprising. The differences between people who win and people who don't, they have almost nothing to do with economics, education, or background. He can show you people with no education, raised by broken families in terrible surroundings, who still built stratospheric success. So if it isn't those things, what is it? It's how they think, talk, and act. And he found a whole set of repeatable traits that show up again and again in the successful. He says success is just a skill. Duplicate the habits and mindsets of successful people, and you'll create success yourself. Let me walk you through the ones that matter most. The first is a can-do attitude. Successful people approach every situation with the underlying belief that, no matter what, it can be done. They speak in terms of solutions. We'll figure it out. Let's make it happen. And right alongside that is the phrase, I will figure it out. Cardone actually pushes back on the popular advice to just admit when you don't know something. He says throwing up your hands doesn't move anything forward. Far better to say, great question, let me figure that out. You stay honest, but you point toward a solution instead of advertising your limits. The next cluster is about how they relate to problems. Successful people don't avoid problems. They seek them out because they understand something most people miss. A problem solved equals a new product, a new customer, a new source of success. The bigger the problem and the more people it affects, the bigger the opportunity for whoever solves it. Where most people see a setback, the 10x person sees an opening. Then there are the traits people find genuinely uncomfortable. Be unreasonable, be dangerous, and no, those aren't typos. Cardone says being reasonable, acting only in accordance with what's practical and agreed upon, will never get you what you want. Think about it. Would we have airplanes, space travel, the internet, telephones, if someone hadn't done something another person called unreasonable? Almost everything exceptional that humans have ever built started as someone refusing to be reasonable, and be dangerous is his answer to a lifetime of being told to be careful. Since childhood, everyone has been trying to keep you safe, but Cardone argues that if you look back over your life, being careful has probably cost you as much as being bold ever could. To do something big, to work with powerful people, to take real swings, you have to be willing to step into danger. The way to make sure it doesn't destroy you is simple. Be trained well enough that you walk out of the ring the victor. Here's one with a major shift in how to see money. Create wealth. Cardone says unsuccessful people believe they have to work to make money and then spend their lives either burning it or hoarding it in fear. With the very successful, no, money is already created. It exists in abundance. They focus on generating wealth through new ideas, products, services, and solutions. He even notes a quiet detail with big consequences. Income gets taxed, wealth often doesn't. So shift your attention from conserving a salary to creating actual wealth, and you start thinking the way successful people think. A few more that tie the whole philosophy together. Always say yes. Say yes to life, to opportunity, to new experiences, until you become so successful you're forced to start saying no just to manage your time. Be interested in results, not effort. Cardone is blunt here. Nobody cares that you tried to take out the trash if the garbage is still piling up in your house. Stop rewarding yourself for trying. Save the celebration for actual results, and one that quietly determines almost everything. Reach up in your relationships. The successful constantly surround themselves with people who are smarter, more connected, more capable than they are. You will almost never hear one of them say, I got here by surrounding myself with people just like me. Cardone puts it simply: a black belt doesn't learn new skills from a white belt. You can't become a scratch golfer by only playing with beginners. If you want to rise, you have to spend time with people who are already above you. Reach up, never sideways, and never down. He closes this list with the trait that holds all the others together: discipline. Discipline is doing the uncomfortable thing over and over until it becomes your normal operating procedure. Most people's so-called discipline is really just a collection of bad habits running on autopilot. The 10x person deliberately chooses which habits are constructive and then drills them until they become who they are. And Cardone is honest. He doesn't hit every one of these traits every single day either. The goal isn't perfection. It's spending most of your time operating the way successful people operate. Key takeaways. So let's pull this all together, because underneath the stories, the provocations, and the lists, the 10x rule really comes down to a handful of ideas that, once you absorb them, are very hard to unsee. First, and this is the whole foundation, multiply both halves. Set goals 10 times bigger than what you think you want. Then take 10 times more action than you think it will require to get there. Most people only ever consider the action. The genius and the difficulty of this book live in that second part, daring to dream at a scale that feels almost embarrassing to say out loud. Second, there are 4 degrees of action, and 3 of them are quietly killing your potential. Doing nothing, retreating, and the most dangerous one of all, normal, average action. Because it's socially accepted, it feels responsible, and it leaves you completely exposed the moment life changes. Only massive action builds something that lasts. Third, average is a failing formula, not just in business, in your finances, your health, your relationships, your entire life. The world delivers far more resistance than average effort can withstand. Prepare for the 1,000-pound backpack and the headwind, and you'll make it through. Plan for smooth conditions, and the first storm takes you down. Fourth, treat success as a duty, not an option. The moment success becomes a responsibility you owe to your family, your future, and your own potential, rather than something nice that might happen, everything shifts. And remember, there's no shortage of it. Someone else's win was never your loss. Fifth, the signals you've been taught to fear are actually proof you're on the right path. New problems mean you're taking enough action. Fear is a green light, not a stop sign, so act before time lets it grow. And criticism is a milestone that means you're finally big enough to be noticed. And sixth, don't compete, dominate. Find what others refuse to do and do exactly that relentlessly. Build your fire so big that even your competitors come to sit beside it. Expand when the world contracts. Stay obsessed. Go all in every single time, because your chips, your energy and creativity and persistence never actually run out. Underneath every one of these is a single, quietly radical belief. Nothing happens to you. It happens because of you. The moment you take full responsibility for everything in your life, the good, the bad, and even the things that seem completely outside your control, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become the author of them. Closing. Remember where we started. The idea that the real enemy was never failure, it was doing just enough. That comfortable, responsible-looking, average life that quietly costs you everything you are actually capable of. Cardone's whole argument is that you have been operating with the brakes on, setting goals shaped by other people's limits, taking action calibrated to a world that doesn't actually exist, a gentle world without resistance. And the way out isn't to work a little harder or dream a little bigger. It's to multiply by 10 on both ends. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not do you agree with Grant Cardone, but something more personal. In the one area of your life that matters most to you right now, what would it actually look like if you set a goal 10 times bigger than the one you've quietly settled for? And what's the very first action, the one you could take today before the fear has time to grow. Sit with that, because the honest answer is usually uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly the indicator Cardone would tell you to follow. If this resonated with you, the 10x rule is absolutely worth owning. There's a depth of personal story and detail in the full book that's genuinely worth your time, and you can find it on Amazon and Audible. Links are in the description below if you'd like to support the channel by grabbing a copy. And if you got value from this, consider subscribing. There's a whole library of these deep dives waiting for you, and a new one is always on the way. Until then, go take some massive action now, not later.